We met in Alaska, had a good meeting. Then he went back and started sending drones into Kiev. I thought we were a little bit threatened by Russia recently, and I sent a submarine, nuclear submarine, the most lethal weapon ever made. I announced that, based on his mention of nuclear, and it was really a stupid person that works for him mentioned the word nuclear, I moved a submarine or two, I won't say about the two, over to the coast of Russia, just to be careful, because we can't let people throw around.
Imagine a war where the front lines aren't just in Ukraine. Now Russia itself is being drawn deeper into the fight. Late today, the U.S. reportedly took a bold leap by authorizing the sharing of precise intelligence to help Ukraine strike energy targets inside Russia. This marks a sharp escalation in the conflict, one with rippling implications for global energy markets, war strategy, and nuclear brinkmanship. In a major policy shift, the United States will now provide Ukraine with intelligence aimed at supporting missile strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, such as refineries, pipelines, and power plants. Two U.S. officials confirmed the decision to Reuters, a development first reported by the Wall Street Journal. This marks, at least publicly, the first time Washington has explicitly backed deep strike targeting well behind Russian front lines. The U.S. is also urging NATO partners to offer similar support. Though intelligence sharing between Washington and Kiev has existed previously, the new data is expected to sharpen Ukraine's ability to strike critical nodes in Russia's energy grid, a move designed to squeeze Moscow's war revenues and undermine its logistical backbone. Moscow's reaction has been swift. The Kremlin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov dismissed the shift as nothing new, arguing that the U.S. and NATO have long been supplying Ukraine with intelligence. Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin warned that providing long-range Tomahawk missiles, one of Ukraine's requests, would seriously harm the U.S.-Russia relations and could threaten further escalation. Putin downplayed expectations that this move alone would decisively change battlefield dynamics. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky hailed the move as a step in the right direction, leveling the playing field. Tomahawk cruise missiles, which have a range of up to 1,500 miles and would significantly increase Kiev's strike envelope, are reportedly still being considered by Washington. As of this moment, no definitive decision has been made about missile delivery. In response, Russia has maintained that the larger balance of power on the ground would not necessarily change even if new weapons were supplied. Understanding why energy infrastructure is so important in this conflict is crucial to appreciating the stakes. Ukraine has been deliberately targeting dozens of Russian refineries since 2025, which has severely disrupted fuel transportation and reduced domestic production. According to Euronews, Russian imports of petrol and diesel may soon rise as Moscow tries to compensate for internal shortfalls, even contemplating lifting import duties in certain regions. Ukraine has claimed to have hit at least 16 out of Russia's 38 major oil refineries over recent months, contributing to long queues and reduced fuel availability in some regions. Until now, Ukraine's long-range strikes have largely relied on drones and shorter-range missiles, with limited destructive reach. A drone might be likened to a precise surgical strike, effective but repairable. A missile strike, especially when armed with large warheads, is closer to a hammer blow, damaging broad swaths of infrastructure that may require months or years to rebuild. The damage radius of a missile far exceeds that of a drone, allowing for more efficient targeting and denial of critical systems. In effect, the U.S. intelligence sharing is meant to transform these piecemeal attacks into coordinated assaults on the very arteries that fuel Russia's war machine. Not just the front line, but the home front. This sends a strategic message. This conflict is not just over territory. It's over the capacity to wage war itself. For Moscow, this is especially dangerous. Fuel revenues are a lifeline for Russia's military logistics and domestic stability. Weakening them risks intensifying internal discontent, particularly among elites who own or depend on the energy sector. Meanwhile, the Russian military has attempted to mitigate attacks using countermeasures like KOP cages, protective cages around sensitive equipment intended to defend against drones. But these systems offer limited defense against large, high-velocity missile strikes, a glaring vulnerability if Ukraine escalates further. In response to the new U.S. move, Russian propaganda and informational warfare are expected to ramp up dramatically, painting the policy as direct U.S. aggression and warning of broader confrontation.
I don't want to say we're making money because I don't want to be making money on a war. It's too many people dying. They're losing 7,000 soldiers a week. A lot of them are Russian soldiers, but between the two countries, mostly soldiers, by the way. Sometimes, in Kiev, they'll lob a missile in or some drones in, kill some people. But mostly it's soldiers. Russia and Ukraine are losing 7,000 souls. And they're not they're not American, they're not us, they're not you, or have a special obligation, but they're soldiers, they're young people, they leave their parents, they wave goodbye, and then 2 days later they're blown.
What we're seeing is an attempt to substitute notions. Because this is not a question of whether the Kiev regime is allowed or not allowed to strike targets on Russian territory. It is already carrying out strikes using unmanned aerial vehicles and other means. But using Western-made long-range precision weapons is a completely different story. The fact is that I have mentioned this, and any expert both in our country and in the West will confirm this. The Ukrainian army is not capable of using cutting-edge high-precision long-range systems supplied by the West. They cannot do that. These weapons are impossible to employ without intelligence data from satellites which Ukraine does not have. This can only be done using the European Union's satellites or US satellites, in general NATO satellites. This is the first point. The second point, perhaps the most important, the key point even, is that only NATO military personnel can assign flight missions to these missile systems. Ukrainian servicemen cannot do this. Therefore, it is not a question of allowing the Ukrainian regime to strike Russia with these weapons or not. It is about deciding whether NATO countries become directly involved in the military conflict or not. If this decision is made, it will mean nothing short of direct involvement. It will mean that NATO countries, the United States and European countries are parties to the war in Ukraine. This will mean their direct involvement in the conflict, and it will clearly change the very essence, the very nature of the conflict dramatically. This will mean that NATO countries, the United States and European countries, are at war with Russia. And if this is the case, then bearing in mind the change in the essence of the conflict, we will make appropriate decisions in response to the threats that will be posed to us.
Some geopolitical observers warn of dangerous thresholds ahead. Russia may attempt asymmetric retaliation, cyber attacks, targeting Western infrastructure or supply lines, or even escalation at nuclear facilities to raise the stakes. So far, Moscow has frequently threatened attacks on nuclear or energy sites inside Ukraine to project existential risk. Whether Russia tries to carry out similar gambits inside its own borders or sabotage its own network to deny Ukraine remains unconfirmed but is being closely watched by analysts. What does this mean for the trajectory of the war? First, the U.S. move signals a clear shift away from restraint and toward escalation. Strict prohibitions under earlier administrations prohibited the direct employment of American weapons or intelligence to penetrate deep into Russia. Washington now seems to have decided that proportional escalation is required due to the pressure of the war's length and Russia's refusal to engage in genuine negotiations. Second, a change of this kind raises the possibility of a tit-for-tat escalation between the West and Moscow. De facto war has already been threatened by the Kremlin if long-range missiles are supplied. The threat of a wider conflict would increase if Moscow retaliated by attacking friends or infrastructure connected to the West. However, experts point out that Russia might be limited by its own diplomatic and material boundaries. Third, these strikes could exacerbate divisions within Russia. Russian elites tied to the energy and defense sectors could find themselves bearing new risks as production and revenue take hit after hit. For Russia's armed forces, already stretched and facing manpower challenges, the loss of fuel and supply chains could impede future offensives or even slow operations. Finally, for Ukraine, this new capability is double-edged. While opening up opportunities for crippling strikes, it also raises the stakes. Ukraine must now carefully calibrate which infrastructure to hit to maintain moral and legal legitimacy, avoid civilian casualties, and prevent overreach that might alienate Western support. Moreover, Kyiv remains dependent on external aid, weapon deliveries, and intelligence partnerships. Any misstep or backlash could jeopardize that support. As Washington, Kyiv, and Moscow all adapt to this escalation, the coming weeks may offer a window into how far the war can stretch without slipping into even broader confrontation. In the coming days, we will be watching Russian public messaging, retaliatory strikes inside or outside Russian territory, and how NATO responds to this shift in U.S. policy.